You may be busy doing something while you listen to this podcast, but you're never too busy to eat healthy if you eat Vite Ramen. This podcast is sponsored by Vite Ramen. Show support for a sponsor that supports Moore's Law is Dead at the link in the description. And if you do, make sure you use offer code BrokenSilicon. And you can also support Moore's Law is Dead if you need Windows keys or software at cdkeyoffer.com. If you go there, also use the code BrokenSilicon for 25% off Windows keys or Die Shrink for 3% off everything else on the website. All right, now let's get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and I'm joined today by my co-host,
Dan.
How you doing, Dan?
I'm not too bad, I suppose. How are you doing?
I'm pretty tired. I just finished one of those almost like 30-minute videos going over, well, we'll talk about it, AMD's options with Zen 5 that I think make them more than competitive with Arrow Lake if they want to be. I think that's a real question too. Actually, I think a lot of the stories we're going to be talking about today are like, when do companies want to even try to win anymore? Like, is it even worth the money to win in some markets? I think half of the stories kind of touch on that concept, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's just the fact that, in a lot of ways, there's not that much money in the consumer market, especially in some sectors. So,
yeah, it makes you wonder, like,
or to some tiers, I should say.
Like, was it always a mistake? Was it a mistake in the past more often than people realize? Like, all this money spent to win gaming benchmarks in the past few decades by 10% that could have gone towards other stuff. But at the same time, if I just think about it, I mean, NVIDIA was, people go look at their stock price from 20 years ago. They were a tiny company that really couldn't even be bothered to attempt to compete in other markets. And the same goes for actually a lot of the companies we're talking about today. And at the same time, I guess, you know, a lot of the truly like next level things you can do with a lot of these technologies that have been built for 30 years, they just weren't there yet. So maybe they were only really useful for like entertaining consumers until they could do anything useful besides, you know, higher resolution stuff or something.
I mean, that's true. Like, well, I mean, it's still a relatively new thing where AI is this gigantic thing that NVIDIA has just become the easy market leader in at this point. So that's obviously a huge part of their market cap.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get to the first reader mail here. Chagaholic writes in and he says, "Hi, Tom and Dan. In the latest Broken Silicon, I really like the part where you talked about dogs. We do a podcast where you only talk about dogs. We didn't write in and tell you stories about our own dogs." I wouldn't honestly entirely be against eventually. Like, I think I've said this before. Like, right now we do a Broken Silicon every week. We do a Die Shrink every other week. And in between those, there's a loose ends usually. So there's like 1 week really free for bonus content every month. For now, that usually gets filled with either me getting enough sleep 1 week of a month, or there's 2 videos that week, right? Mm-hmm. Or something like that. So I don't know that we have, but if we like hired someone else, I wouldn't mind having like one other bonus podcast for patrons. And it could just be about whatever you guys vote on. And I can assure you there would be a dog episode.
Oh, yeah. And as you can see, probably there is a dog currently sleeping behind me. It is
let people
see the little brown mask
the second you move. Well, and you know, Wendy will be in the house I'm in right now in like I guess maybe not a little over a few days. Yeah. And we'll finally meet this idiot over here for the first time, who's now looking at the camera. Oh my God.
That should be an interesting meeting of the two.
Yeah, well, and we're going to have to, my girlfriend's cat is just finally starting to get along. There's never really that bad, but they still don't really get each other. It's a nice cat. He listens. if I tell him no, he says no. He rolls over if he's bad. He rolls over for me usually when he sees me and wants me to rub his belly. So he's one of those playful, like he's a huge cat too, like almost 20 pounds. He's not that fat. He's a big cat, So, but the problem is like they've gotten to the stage where like Jesse and Maurice, the cat's name, are kind of comfortable around each other. They even walk up multiple times a day and sniff each other. And then Maurice might lick Jesse once because he's like, you seem nice. And then Jesse's like, oh my, it's like stepbrothers. Did we just become best friends? And Jesse jumps up and down and starts putting her feet like this to play. Maurice is like, get away from me. He's like, don't you realize you're triple my size and scare me?
So throwing another dog in the mix should be interesting, although Wendy's typically been pretty good around cats from what I've seen. She's kind of just like wants to sniff them but doesn't want to get within like 3 feet of them because she's, I think, vaguely scared of them.
Vaguely scared is what they both are of each other, but then the second Jesse's not scared, she's like, let's wrestle. And Maurice is not game for that. What your dog, what Wendy does, is probably exactly what the Maurice doctor ordered, actually, and what he would prefer. Company, but don't touch me.
Yeah, well, that's the advantage of a dog that's once they get slightly older, because Wendy's 6 now, so she's a little bit past the... she's past her puppy days at this point, but...
All right. Well, let us move on. We did have a correction, which, of course, you support Moore's Laws on Patreon. You can submit corrections to the proper channels in the Discord to tell us when we're stupid, which is, I think, more often than people tell us. Well, more often than our fans tell us. Definitely not more often than the internet tells everyone every day. But TechnoLads writes in and asks, in the latest Broken Silicon, when comparing the Titan to AMD's 7970 gigahertz edition, at the 1 hour 29-minute mark, you, and then at the for the public version, or in the 1 hour 26-minute mark for the Patreon version, you say they both had 6 gigabytes of RAM. And most sources I find show that the 7970 gigahertz edition only had 3 gigabytes of RAM. And then he says edit, so I guess he edited this submission later. I guess I do see 2 models, a VaporX and Toxic, that had 6 gigabytes, and you did mention those models earlier, right? Like, I didn't go back and listen to it. I'm not sure how I phrased it, but I do know that we mentioned those models at some point. And the entire point is, like, there was the 7970 that really started as $500 or $600, somewhere around there, slowly dropped in price to about $400, right? And the 7970 gigahertz was usually over $500 with 3 gigabytes. And there was like a $600 to $750 6 gigabyte Toxic edition that ran at, I believe, 20% higher core clocks and possibly more than that. And pretty crazy memory clocks at the time. And it outperformed a standard 7970 by, I think, at least 20%. And you could overclock it to be like a 40%. Point being, it was really only 20% weaker than the Titan, had the same amount of RAM. And, it cost like $400 less or something absurd, like, $300 less, I just always think back to that, like how I was like blown away at the time. Like no reviews pointed that out, and they were like, the Titan's 40% stronger than a 7970. That's crazy. And it's like, well, there's the Toxic that is the same amount of RAM. And where's this in the reviews?
Yeah, and that was that era when the AIB like overclocked models. There was sometimes it was just it's a new tier in performance or essentially a new card, whereas here like people now are like splitting hairs over the premium and like base models of a lot of them, and then they get like the exact same performance, although albeit the premium models still get better thermals, but still.
Yeah, they usually get stupidly better thermals than the reference models. Not always stupidly better, but often stupidly better. And then they're way bigger, and that's about all you get.
Yeah.
Right? If we're being honest. Unless you consider paying another $200 for like 35 extra megahertz to be a huge performance increase, which I remember during the mining era, the most recent mining era, it was very funny to me. EVGA had like 10 different versions of the same 3080, and each one was like $50 more for like 10 megahertz. And they were like, well, it's a different model. This isn't us gouging.
But basically a new card.
It's basically a new card. That's why it costs twice as much. That's why this 3070 Ti costs $1,000. It has 50 higher megahertz. It should cost more than a 3080. Come on. But all right, I think we covered that correction quite enough. And now we should get into story number 1, which broke right before we started recording. Moore's Law is dead confirms new Zen 5 details. This week, yours truly set out hunting for the answer to one potentially big question. Can AMD launch an R9 8960 X3D next year? Can AMD combine dense and standard Zen chiplets with Vcache on AM5? Well, the answer, at least in my opinion, is yes, and much more. In summary, number 1, according to this channel's sources and arguably public information released by AMD and others by now, AMD's Ryzen IO die doesn't just support the standard chiplets, it supports the C chiplets. And according to the people I talked to, there should be no scheduling or whatever issues in handling both of them at the same time. In fact, AMD could not only potentially launch a 24 or 32 core model with Zen 5 next year, but supposedly they could do an 8+16 model of Zen 4 now. However, if the thing you say immediately is, well, then why didn't they? But you think about it, Bergamo launched, I believe, 3 months ago. That is the first product with Zen 4C. So they didn't have Zen 4C to launch last year. And the first second they can launch it, Bergamo makes a lot more money. That is why it has not launched with Zen 4. But all of this could change with Zen 5 because Zen 5C actually might launch before Zen 5. It might actually be ready like January next year, from what I can tell. And so there's no reason there may not be like a couple months of server sales or something. And then they can build up some stock for, you know, a Zen 5 plus Zen 5C model. Additionally, I also have schematics of these Zen, which you've seen, Dan, the Zen 5 Turin, like IO die and design. And I mean, most of it frankly confirms what's already been leaked by this channel for the past 6 months. But there were a couple of things that stood out to me. Number 1, there was further confirmation that the memory is going to be faster by default, a lot faster with Zen 5 over Zen 4. Additionally, there was, like, on the schematic it showed, I've already leaked this, but here is proof, physical proof that I could see. It's 16 8-core chiplets. So 16 times 8-core Zen 5 chiplets for a total of 128 cores. But I think the biggest bombshell I saw in this diagram, which I can't 100% confirm, you know, I'd want to see more before I double down on it. But at least on this diagram, Dan, and I have a sister diagram for Zen 4. The Zen 4 one says Bergamo chiplets can use these like CCD ports. And then Genoa can use these ones. It doesn't say that on Zen 5. For all I know, they could do 16 times 16 cores for Turin dense. But maybe they won't because they don't have the bandwidth to support that many cores. Or maybe they're worried about thermal or power consumption issues. But I just think that's worth pointing out that there is still a chance, in my opinion, they could be hiding some 256 core. They have been kind of hiding. Just like they've maybe been hiding that they can launch an 8 Zen 5 X3D plus 16 Zen 5C product next year. And I think this is a really big deal because as far as I'm aware, Arrow Lake, you know, the big cores don't have hyper-threading. And while they'll be like 30, I don't know, let's say 25 to 40% better single threading, right, than Raptor Lake. Well, Zen 5 should be probably 25 to 35% better single threading. So it might be a little behind that. But then you add Vcache and probably catches up in gaming. And then the 16 little cores, that's all Intel is going to have with Arrow Lake next year, I believe. I know there's an 8 plus 32 core model, but I don't think that'll be ready till 2025. So AMD may have so think about it then. Intel has maybe just a 24 thread product next year, then a 40 thread product following up early next year. AMD may have a 48 or 64 thread products out the beginning of next year before Arrow Lake's even out. Meaning, I'm not going to double down on any of this. And there's a real chance AMD never launches this stuff because it just doesn't financially make sense to them, which we could have that discussion if you want. But if they want to, it sounds like they could probably be pretty close in gaming and crush Arrow Lake in multi-threading from what I can tell. I mean, if you think about that. But yeah, the other thing is I found more evidence that AMD is launching a Phoenix to desktop late this year or early next year. And yeah, that's about it. So what'd you think, Dan?
Yeah, that's the one thing with the like C cores versus normal cores versus V-cache cores or CCDs at this point, that I'm really curious how they're going to mix and match them once that's more of an, well, apparently they can do it right now, but like going into the future, once that's, as all of those mature more, what they're going to mix them with. Because in my mind, an 8-core with V-cache plus like a 16-core Zen 5C CCD sounds kind of odd, because it's now doing a mix of like almost being a pseudo server build, CPU, while also being probably the best gaming build CPU mixed together. Which, I don't know, maybe there's a market for that, but the things that make the most sense to me still are kind of if they just had two Zen 5C CCDs together and just have a ton of cores that are slightly lower clocked, and that's not necessarily being marketed to gamers.
Well, the reason I don't think they do that, I didn't say this in the video, but this is, why we talk about it in a podcast to more flesh out our thoughts on things. That's 2-3 nanometer CCDs. I don't know that they want to sell that to gamers.
Yeah, that's probably expensive for us poor gamers.
And, this entire time, like we've been talking about like the 7950 X3D and how you have, that's probably why they didn't put V-cache on both of them, but also so their multi-threading performance can be higher, because one of the CCDs without V-cache on the 7950 X3D can boost 10% higher or so. But, that also leads to so many scheduling issues. Some apps, even some games, don't benefit as much from V-cache. And so you have this situation where all Windows is really doing with AMD CPUs is it can kind of tell which thread is the most important thread. And it's like looking at all these cores dynamically boosting. They're like, that's the fastest, send it there, send it there, send it there. That's all it's doing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of annoying things you have to deal with if you have to schedule for one CCD that's better at gaming, but one that's worse but clocks faster. The second you make that second CCD never really go above 4 gigahertz, it's all gone, because the CCD with V-cache will probably always be boosting higher anyways. That's why I think it makes sense, just because of how smoothly it would all run together.
No, that's true. I guess we're going to see the normal cores paired with Zen 4C. Zen C cores as well. So, I guess I don't know why they would never attempt to pair it with V-cache as well. It's just I could just see that being a way that they just have way fewer scheduling issues than what they do right now with the current V-cache models, because that is the biggest problem you have with like the 7950 X3D these days. And I don't know, then just having twice as many quote unquote background threads would be pretty ideal, even if they clock way lower.
Well, yeah. And the hypothetical, there it is. The hypothetical lineup that I came up with that I think would be a problem for Intel omitted the 32 core Zen 5C, not because they can't do it, but because I'm just like, I don't know why they would sell that to gamers, like, what is it going to cost $1,000?
That's like almost a Threadripper killer in some ways, I feel like.
Yeah, and you almost don't want to do that for segmentation with Threadripper, which I believe launches end of this year, early next year as well. But like, I don't think actually they need to use that much C to flesh out this lineup. Like, I could totally see, speaking of C, I could totally see early next year the launch topping out at like 20 cores, like 8 Zen 5 plus 12 Zen 5C, just getting rid of the bad yields even, because I don't even think they need more than that. And then they have their 8950X go up to like 20 cores. And then I think you still just keep the 12 core and then you're done. You don't, only one chip with the C cores in the lineup, and it's only one with a disabled thing. Like, I think that's what I would do if I was AMD, and then just wait. And then late next year, if Arrow Lake's a threat, maybe they'll decide it isn't. Maybe they'll just do an 8800 X3D and call it a day. But if there is a threat, that's when you launch the full 24 core and give it V-cache, because it just ends the argument. Like, I'm only talking about a lineup, even though it has like 6 or 7 SKUs. that has one model with a fully enabled Zen 5C chip and then one with a disabled one, so that you're not competing with Bergamo Next as much. It's like, I just think that's also worth pointing out. Like, this flexibility really would only be there for a prestige. I don't even think they'd have to launch half of the things they could right away.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just all of a matter of the thing that AMD can kind of have an issue with all of these different variants that they can put out at this point is they don't want to release models that are cannibalizing each other, which is, I think, even in this current lineup is kind of doing to it to a small extent, because the 7800 X3D is just such a good buy for most people that it kind of makes the rest of their lineup look bad. But
I fully agree. There's no point in the 7900 X3D, in my opinion. And if you'll notice in the video I put out, I don't mention any 12-core X3D because I think that's stupid. You have the flagship and the gaming chip. I do not see why you need more than that. And I don't know why AMD did more than that this generation.
But yeah, I mean, if they just put like one like Zen 5C course, one Zen 5C CCD at the top of their Zen 5 consumer or desktop lineup, or two, yeah, that could be there, and I don't think that would cannibalize anything. And that might make like the 7960 X3D be an even
8960 X3D.
Yeah, sorry, the 8960 X3D take the.
I made up the name anyway, so you're forgiven.
Yeah, I know. That might make it take the gaming crown over like the 8800 X3D, which presumably, if Zen 5 is similar to Zen 4, the 8800 X3D would have the gaming crown again, if they release basically the same models again with the new updated architecture.
Let me throw this idea at you too. Obviously, we're recording too soon to get reader mails about this like leak/analysis video in time for the podcast. But I did see responses in the Discord, and a few people said, I hate that name. Really? Isn't that just the naming scheme they're using already, Dan? And how could this be worse than, names like Ultra 9 Meteor Lake or the insane word salad that the Pro Threadripper naming has become?
Yeah, I don't think that's bad. I don't know. I don't know what else you would call it, honestly.
Right, and the R9 8960 X3D, the 60 is what they used for 24 cores in the past.
Yeah.
But I do, if we're splitting hairs, and I guess we are now, I do think if they had a 32 core, because none of them are normal Zen 5, they would call that WX to denote, hey, none of these boost fast enough. Just my 2 cents.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think it's fair to call it an 8960 if one of the CCDs is boosting past 5 gigahertz. But if none of them are, I don't think that's fair. I think you have to put WX, don't you?
Probably. I mean, unless they just say we don't care about our old naming conventions, which happens fairly often.
We'll get to that later in this episode. But for now, QH Freddy writes in and asks, Intel appears to be going really hard on maximizing single-threaded performance on their big cores with Arrow Lake and later architectures that follow it. Do you think they are going too far in that direction? My answer that I wrote ahead of time is we just won't know until we have Arrow Lake versus Zen 5 reviews.
Yeah, I mean, we're really worried about losing hyper-threading. Maybe it won't matter that much. You never know.
Right, because, and I think a lot of that hinges on how good the E-cores are. Like,
yeah,
if you think about how AMD's pulled off keeping up with Raptor Lake now is 24 cores, but the little cores suck compared to AMD's cores. And in fact, I didn't cover this in the video, but AMD's presentation at Hot Chips for Zen 4 talked about how, I forgot what the number was, but they said it was something like performance uplift and multi-threading with Zen 3 to Zen 4 went from, when you turn on hyper-threading, it's like a 25% performance increase to now it's like 30 or 35 or 40%. Like their hyper-threading is crazy optimized now. And so, I mean, I think it just, will the little cores in Arrow Lake be so good that we don't care? Or is it going to be a situation where, AMD just increases performance per core, even if they just had 16 cores, by the way, by like 35%. And that's enough to match Arrow Lake's, multi-threading, Additionally, though, I do have to add this as well. Even if Arrow Lake ends up like beating Zen 5, let's say, by 10% in gaming, but loses by 10 to 20% in multi-threading. And maybe it costs more and it's overall considered less impressive, maybe because it's less efficient. I don't know. Well, what if Nova Lake like double single threading or something? Then it would kind of be like a Zen 1 situation where it's like, yeah, if Zen 1 went another direction, because Zen 1 kind of used CCXs when it didn't need to on consumer. Like, besides sharing chiplets with Epic, of course. But they used 2 CCXs in a CCD early because they were building towards Zen 2. And that paid off. So if I'm being honest, QH Freddy, I don't actually know if I'll think this is a mistake until we see Nova Lake, which is like 2026 or 2027, because it's not just about if they're competitive now. It's about if they're building towards an architecture that crushes everything in a few years, right?
Yeah, because that's ultimately the problem that Intel has had, is they got stuck on an architecture that crushed for a few generations and then fell behind. So,
yeah. Exactly. So we don't know. We won't know until Nova Lake which way it's going. Deadeyes117 writes in and says, "Hi, Tom and Dan. My understanding is that Zen 4C is effectively identical to Zen 4, except that it more or less trades thermal management and L3 cache for significantly reduced size. Please correct me if I'm wrong. If that's the case, how much ground do you think Zen 4C could make up on proper Zen 4 if it had 3D Vcache, but Zen 4 did not? And then also, how that compared to full Zen 4 Vcache? In one case, ostensibly, the only difference would be clock speed, right? And in other words, it would be clocked plus additional L3 cache. Obviously, we would still have reduced clock speeds as a result of thermal density, but this could be a way of making their super energy efficient CPUs for mobile. P.S. I really appreciate the way this channel allows my nerd brain to wander." Well, I think I could. What I wrote down before we started recording was this: if the Zen 4C and consumer in server, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that because it's a whole other can of worms. But in consumer, is it giving you 16 cores now? Well, with Zen 4, we're not talking about Zen 5, which might have a unified 16-core CCX from what I hear, which who knows then? All bets are off on how good that could perform in games, actually. But Zen 4C has 2 8-core CCXs. So there's a little bit of a latency penalty there. Not the same as 2 chiplets, but it's there. And so that's going to hurt gaming a little. You're not going to get that benefit of being able to use more cores in a game on one CCD. All right, so the only benefit then is we're saying Vcache at 4 gigahertz versus no Vcache. The core count difference isn't going to help games. Right, but one's running at like 5.7 gigahertz. So even with Vcache, it's like 30% slower. No, I think that answers your question why they're not doing that.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I don't know. Would the addition of Vcache further limit clock speeds on the C cores as well, or no?
I don't think so, because I think they're already tweaked to run at a lower voltage, which is the whole issue. It's not like a thermal issue. It's just a max voltage issue, and I don't think that would be present. I don't know for sure, though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So you would probably end up just getting something that's maybe in between normal and C cores as far as gaming efficiency goes.
But you'd get more cores on one CCD, I guess.
Yeah.
That don't benefit gaming, but benefit background tasks. Yeah. The only other thing I would throw at that as a consideration here is one of the main reasons Zen 4C has the same IPC as Zen 4 is it doesn't try to clock faster. More cache helps scale with or keep performance per clock at higher clocks, right? A lot of people were surprised that Raptor Lake had like a 0 to 1% IPC increase over Alder Lake. Right, but all that extra cache was so they wouldn't lose performance per clock past 6 gigahertz. So I almost wonder if there's a thing where it's like, well, really low clock speeds, how much would it benefit from cache? In some games, a lot, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were some outliers that appeared where it's like, unless we don't need the extra cache unless you're at 5 gigahertz.
Yeah.
So I don't know. More food for thought there. But it all kind of points to why they don't think it's worth it. Raisin Biscuit writes in and he asks, "Hi, Tom and Dan. With 14th gen around the corner, will Intel do what they did for 13th gen regarding having the lower tiers be previous gen silicon, i.e., where everything below the 13600K was based off of Alder Lake? Could we see Alder Lake silicon still Under the 14th gen moniker, could some of the lower tiers be Raptor Lake non-refresh silicon in the 14th gen lineup? I don't know how accurate these specs from WCCF Tech are. Links in the description. But just looking at the cache, it seems that the 14600 and 14500 at least might have been promoted from Alder Lake to some form of Raptor Lake compared to the 13600 and 13500. However, the 14400 below looks likely to remain with Alder Lake silicon. I actually threw this question at someone who works at Intel, and I was told the 8+16, the 8+8, and the 6+8 dies are all Raptor Lake refresh, which is big. That means there's way more SKUs that will be not just Raptor Lake instead of Alder Lake, but Raptor Lake 2.0 instead of Alder Lake. So that means a couple of things, though. Keep in mind what I said, 6+8 and up. Technically right now, below the 13600K, it's all of Alder Lake. Yeah. That's 6+8. So I would suggest there's still going to be some Alder Lake and probably Raptor Lake 1.0 rebrands there. But also, they have to do something with the bad yields of that i5. So I would suggest what we're going to see is everything i5K and up is the newest generation. And a couple of the ones below the i5 are also the newest. And then everything below that's whatever they got left.
So the
answer is yes, but I'd still expect some Alder Lake refreshes.
You might still see some i3 Alder Lakes, basically.
Yeah, which to my memory, they never even released that Raptor Lake i3 die, the 4+0. And I don't know if they will now too. My guess is what they'd more likely do is launch like a 6+0 i3 or a 4+4. I don't know what they would do. Something like that as the i3, and most of the i3s will still be Alder Lake because, to my understanding, they still have a ton of that oversupply. Frog on a unicycle vaping writes in. Okay. Dang. And he asks, hey, Tom and Dan, do you have any information on Zen 4 Threadripper's release date or performance specs? It's Genoa clock faster. There's your specs and performance. But in terms, do I know, it can probably clock as fast as they wanted to, but maybe slightly below. I think, no, if they really wanted to, it could clock just as fast as 7950X, maybe even a little faster. It's just up to if they actually use those yields for Threadripper versus holding them for Epic and then clocking them lower for better power consumption. But otherwise, I have nothing to change about what I've leaked, I believe, for a year straight. Late 2023 or first half of next year. And we're already, by the time this comes out, a day away from September. So I think I'm holding to that.
You're not going to say a last minute Q3 launch?
No, I do not think so. I could see a November, December Threadripper launch, but I think they got to make that decision 1 or 2 months before when they launch. So they have to decide next month we're launching this year. And I think they should if Zen 5 is going to be ready first half of next year. They should. Because that'll be a little weird if they're launching these Zen 5 products we're talking about next to Threadripper Zen 4. Alrighty. Well, completely shifting gears here then to story number 2. Ever get exhausted looking for a safe way to pay reasonable pricing for Microsoft software amongst tons of questionable listings on eBay and shady websites? Well, now you don't have to do this any longer, not if you go to cdkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is brought to you by cdkeyoffer.com and their back to school sale. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest AAA games, cdkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product that I honestly think this community does need in a world where far too many of our components that make up our PCs are getting more expensive every year. The last thing we need is monopolistically priced software to remain on that list of stupid stuff we pay too much for. And the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with cdkeyoffer.com for many years for a reason. They've been good to me. They've been good to Dan. They've been good to family members that use their website when they build a PC. And they've been good to the Moore's Law is Dead community as well. So whether you're looking for Steam, EA, Uplay, or PlayStation keys, or of course Microsoft products, support Moore's Law is Dead by using the code BROKENSILICON for 25% off all Microsoft products or Die Shrink for 3% off everything else. Support us at cdkeyoffer.com today. NVIDIA stock closes at record high after Google AI partnership and impressive Q2 earnings, quoting from a combination of paragraphs from both a CNBC and a CNN article that will be linked below. NVIDIA shares rose 4.2% Tuesday to close at a record $1.2 trillion market cap after the chipmaker announced a partnership with Google that could expand distribution of its artificial intelligence technology. The record close comes less than a week after the company said quarterly revenue doubled from a year earlier, giving a forecast indicating that sales this period could rise 170% on an annual basis. The day after the better-than-expected earnings report, the stock climbed to a record intraday high of $503 before retreating in the afternoon. A new computing era has begun. Companies worldwide are transitioning from general purpose to accelerated computing and generative AI, says NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang, and that the company is working with leading enterprise IT systems and software providers to bring NVIDIA AI to every industry. So yeah, NVIDIA seems on top of the world right now in terms of market cap and sales overall, but this writer would point out, which I did say in a video, I believe, last week, that they are still struggling to maintain MSRPs with Lovelace gaming products without basically halting production, and even then they seem to have trouble, and that in fact the 4060 Ti will get a de facto price drop. That's not a official price drop, but they will lower what they charge partners, and therefore you'll see 4060 Ti's likely drip below MSRP. And about a week out now to head off AMD's upcoming Navi 32 products. So I just think that's worth being remembered. People see this and say NVIDIA doesn't care. No, these are different markets. If their gaming products don't sell, they have to drop in price. But it does mean that their priorities next gen definitely may change, although all of their eggs are definitely in one basket right now. All right, Dan, what did you think about all this NVIDIA earnings news? I mean, there they go.
Like you said, it's they have to drop prices. I mean, because they need to sell their supply of everything that they have in the market, of everything that they're putting on the market. Although obviously AI is where they're making the big bucks right now. And I think we just need to accept that as gamers, that like, this is definitely the secondary market for NVIDIA this day and age. And
it wasn't just a few years ago, or like certainly not 10 years ago. It wasn't.
Yeah, that's why we always talk about the AI bubble, because this is inevitably going to be a bubble when AI industry takes off like this over the course of like 3-4 years. And then everybody in Silicon Valley wants to get in on it. I mean, I think NVIDIA is clearly going to be the big winner in that at this point, because
at least short term, yeah,
they're the people making all of the things for the all of those startups that are going to. We'll see where they're at in a few years, but NVIDIA knows how to capitalize off of it because they're the best at making the hardware for it. So, yep, now they're one of the 5 or 6 biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, at least by market cap.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much else I really have to say about it, because I think if there's the hierarchies of brains, the pinhead brain take is just NVIDIA never going to care about gamers. Prices keep going up. And, NVIDIA to be worth I shouldn't say bazillion. It should be worth trillions and trillions forever. And both of these things might not be true. Just because NVIDIA now sees gaming as a secondary market, at least in the short term, that still means overstock is overstock. If they have a bunch of shit sitting there nobody's buying, even if they mostly care about AI, all that means is they're not going to be more aggressive to drop prices in some departments and make more stuff. They'll make less stuff, but if it's not selling, you're still going to see prices drop. And that still means NVIDIA is going to need to respond somehow. And I would still suspect they may respond more aggressively than you'd think with some products next generation. However, it's not really about will they price things competitively next gen. If this gen is a failure in gaming sales, they'll probably be more aggressive. However, they might not spend as much money on the top chip. Right, that's the galaxy brain. It is more complicated than just NVIDIA doesn't care anymore. Of course, they still care. They just don't. It's just how they care and what they will do is different now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just they're going to probably make fewer, which I don't think they're really making any risky products right now in this day and age. But yeah, they're not going to make as many products that run the risk of not making a profit, which is what you see right now anyways, where like, I don't know. I don't think they're going to be going super far in on the low end market either.
I don't think we're going to see any gaming loss leaders, even if they drop prices.
Yeah. So what you might see, and we've talked about that we might just see a couple years of mid-gen, which I'm fine. Honestly, I mean, not mid-gen, mid-tier, which is honestly fine.
Yeah. I mean, as long as they are good for mid-tier, I agree. All right. Let us now continue the NVIDIA AI-generated train running with no hands in the picture, because then the hands would look screwed up if it was created by AI. With story number 3, NVIDIA DLSS 3.5, enhancing ray tracing with AI. I'm just quoting from NVIDIA's press release here. Today, NVIDIA advanced rendering technology once more with the introduction of NVIDIA DLSS 3.5, featuring ray reconstruction, a new AI model that creates higher quality ray traced images for intensive ray traced games and apps. NVIDIA's newest innovation, ray reconstruction, is part of an enhanced AI-powered neural renderer that improves ray traced image quality for all RTX GPUs by replacing hand-tuned denoisers with an NVIDIA supercomputer-trained AI network that generates higher quality pixels in between sample rays. This was trained with 5 times more data than DLSS 3. DLSS 3.5 recognizes the different ray traced effects to make smarter decisions about using temporal and spatial data to retain high frequency transformation for superior quality upscaling. Trained using offline rendered images, which requires far more computational power than can be delivered during a real-time game, ray reconstruction recognizes lighting patterns from training data, such as the global illumination, ambient occlusion, and recreates it in-game as you play. The results are superior to hand-tuned denoisers. What this means is that multiple ray trace effects that may have been using several denoisers will now be replaced by one reconstruction neural network denoiser. And in these cases, you can actually get a performance boost despite the better image quality. However, in titles with less intensive ray tracing and fewer denoisers, AMD titles, ray reconstruction improves image quality, though it may actually have a slight performance cost because it is actually doing more, right? And Alan Wake 2, Cyberpunk, Phantom Liberty, Portal, RTX, and then Omniverse and a bunch of professional apps will be supporting it this fall. So, I mean, this kind of just dropped kind of suddenly, but not that unsurprisingly, considering it was like, a few days before AMD or a week before AMD announced FSR 3.0. So I think there's a reason it was announced before really any game supported it. But it does look impressive. What do you think about it, Dan?
I mean, it looks impressive. I obviously, in their promotional material, they were comparing it with DLSS off to DLSS 3.5 on, which I would love to see the comparisons to their more comparisons to their older technology and with it just straight up off. But the visual quality is obviously there to me, and that's super impressive. And I think that's the big problem that AMD has versus NVIDIA is AMD announces all of this stuff and they're like, and it's going to be coming out between fall this year and Q1 next year. And then they just put this out as a way to deflate the sales of FSR's announcement. And it's and this is all coming out in a few months or a couple months. And here are a list of games that are going to have it. One of them is Alan Wake, which is a new game and a new expansion pack, which I don't know. I think kind of is a more impressive implementation of it than Forspoken, the Forspoken AMD's benchmark game, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is. Well, I think, FSR 3 is going to actually be in a lot of games soon, but by the time it actually is in a lot of there's plenty of evidence NVIDIA will have a far superior technology once again right next to it.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, we're already talking about it, I think. So let us just jump right in to story number 4. AMD announces FSR 3, and I'm just quoting from their website. FSR 3 uses a combination of super resolution temporal upscaling technology, frame generation to deliver massive frame rates in supported games. The key enhancement with AMD FSR 3 over FSR 2 is the addition of frame generation. In the notes, I underlined key in key technology because as far as I can tell, there's not much of an image quality increase with FSR 3 at all, if there is one. This technology uses an enhanced version of AMD fluid motion frames, which they actually had for a while now, and optical flow technology and temporal game data, such as motion vectors, to generate additional high-quality frames for a higher frame rate in supported games to two times. The additional performance from frame generation can be extremely beneficial in demanding situations, such as gaming at 4K with maximum ray tracing, where you still want some smoothness, or in frame rates are heavily CPU limited, and you wouldn't be getting any extra frames no matter what because of your CPU. At least this could show some extra ones. One important point to note, though, when using frame generations, AMD recommends always running at a minimum of 60 frames per second before frame generation is applied for an optimal and low latency experience. Depending on the graphics hardware being used and overall system specifications, they suggest adjusting game graphics resolution and quality down to make sure you achieve that before turning it on. During development, AMD was fully conscious of the challenges involved so that frame generation did not have an impact on in-game UI. AMD has addressed this in FSR 3 with UI processing included as an integral part of the solution to minimize any impact frame generation may have on in-game interfaces. I don't have a link in the description, but Digital Foundry seemed to indicate this actually may beat DLSS 3's UI handling.
That was a major problem with DLSS 3.
Yeah, and they've improved it since it came out, but it's still a pretty huge issue, I think, in some game that just came out. AMD FSR 3 also includes the latest version of temporal upscaling technology using FSR 2, which has been fully optimized. Okay, so are they not improving it? And a new native AA quality mode, which we go into more later in the blog that I might not. And yeah, and then they go into, includes latency reductions. They do, as you say, mention Forspoken. And then they mentioned that early 2024, they should have an in-driver solution that can force a lower quality version of fluid frames into any DirectX 11 or 12 game as well. So, yeah, I guess you were just giving your opinion kind of already, so I'll just give mine. The big surprise for me is maybe FSR 3's fluid frames look as good as the interpolated frames of DLSS 3. That would be interesting if they actually were as good or beat them at that. And also the in-driver solution needs to be out like today, because that, if it works even half well, I think is a major selling point. After that, though, big disappointments for me in them seemingly announcing no image quality increase or minimal increases.
Yeah, that's the big disappointment. The in-driver stuff is, assuming it works well, is cool. Because if they can just implement a decent version of fluid frames into any game, basically any game, because everything's using DX11/12 at this point. If they can just implement that into anything, I mean, even if it's slightly lower image quality than frame generation from NVIDIA, that makes it a pretty big competitor against them. And, there's not many, or I think there's only one sample they actually have of showing their frame generation in action right now with Forspoken. They have like a 40-second clip or something. The image quality doesn't look like it's any worse to me than what you got from DLSS 3. So obviously you need a lot more samples of that to see if they were just showing a really good section of the game that didn't show a huge loss in quality. But that's promising, and that's honestly that's better than what I was expecting from their frame generation, and I think just kind of speaks to maybe the AI-based hardware accelerated approach that NVIDIA claims is necessary for the technology really isn't.
Right. But it is helping them have better image quality still.
Yes.
It'd be interesting to see that, because I talked to someone at NVIDIA that insisted to me that, well, you could probably get interpolated frames working on Ampere and Turin, that their lack of a flow accelerator that Lovelace has would still make it perform substantially worse. But I don't know if FSR 3 looks as good. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Do we have any other thoughts on it, though? Because we don't have reviews yet, so I don't know how much we can really say, but I don't know that I have that much more to say. If it turns out they were cooking the books and how they presented it, and it looks way worse than DLSS 3's interpolated frames, image quality hasn't increased at all, and there's, in the in-driver version looks like complete ass next year, then we'll call it a failure, but we don't know until we have third-party reviews.
Yeah, and the last thing I guess I would have to say about it is hopefully they get all of the stuff out sooner rather than later, because I think that's AMD's big problem is they always take forever to get their software solutions actually implemented. Like, we're going to be almost halfway. We're probably going to be over halfway to RDNA 4 by the time all of the stuff that they announced at their RDNA 3 launch came out.
Yeah, because like this was the true announcements of Hyper RX. They announced Hyper RX at the beginning, or not even beginning, in December of last year, and then they just said nothing about it until now. And they're like, "It'll be out soon."
Yeah, and it needs to be in a lot more games than what they're currently showing off, because I don't know, in my mind, the games that they were showing off that it had actual integrated support for were kind of B tier games, and
to be fair, it's Cyberpunk isn't B tier, but it's an older game. You know.
Oh yeah, I forgot Cyberpunk is going to get it. So that's. But
well, and for still, DLSS 3.5, my overall opinion is whether it's DLSS 3.5 or FSR 3, I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence every game's going to have either.
Yeah,
for the time being is actually my takeaway.
Yeah, that's true. I do think NVIDIA, since AMD has lit somewhat of a fire under their ass by just putting out FSR, I think NVIDIA has done a bit better of a job of pushing DLSS than FSR, though.
Certainly relative to what we expected, right?
Yeah.
I don't think me and you, well, I'm sure it's on record in some podcast that we said this. Like, I'm pretty sure we both said, you know, FSR will get wider support eventually, or it should. And DLSS, man, NVIDIA will just pay for it to be in every game.
Yep.
So,
no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really have to say about it. You know, I guess we'll see with third-party reviews, but King Harkinian writes in and asks, Advanced Micro Devices, Fidelity FX Super Resolution 3.0 with fluid motion frames. Has technology gone too far? Have we run out of words?
I think we can add a few more in there.
You know, speaking of adding words, there's just something about the way these companies write their press releases that really annoys the hell out of me. Like, the amount of times they just say they have to say the whole name every time in a paragraph to the point that it becomes absurd. We'll get to it in the next story, but like I do usually modify when I'm quoting from these articles slightly for prose. Like they're just like the Radeon RX 7800 XT graphics card is, and every time they say the name, they have to say the AMD Radeon RX 7800 XT graphics card.
Well, AMD made the mistake of deciding to name their CPU and GPU lines almost the same thing, which I don't know if somebody thought that would be cute.
Oh, maybe that is what it is.
It's just confusing.
Yeah. Fatboy Diesel writes in and says, given RDNA 3 has been out for 9 months, what are your thoughts on the U architecture, given that it has had 9 months of driver updates? Is RDNA 3 really in need of fixing at a hardware level, or has it been software all along? Personally, I feel like this was an ambitious design that achieved the goal of working without major issues or hardware bugs. If anyone remembers some previous generations, we're getting a slow but steady trickle of updates optimizing RDNA 3's performance, and it seems like the typical scenario where AMD puts out hardware that needs better software support and slowly increases performance due to its limited resources at RTG. I'd say it's typical, not oversized. There's been some games, I think like Forza Horizon 5 or something, got like some doubling of frame rates or something absurd. But on average, you know, it's pretty much where it has been relative to the 4090. Maybe it's gained 2%. I don't know on average, but we haven't seen a major overhaul. And do I think when it comes to hardware, the hardware works? And we're talking about, again, if we're comparing Navi 31 7900 XTX to the 4090, the 4090 has 20% more silicon. All of it's on an N4 node. AMD is only like 2/3 of it, or a little under 2/3 is on 5 nanometer. So from that perspective, it's a miracle. It's only 20% behind. Although, I don't want to get into which one's the full die because I could actually argue neither are. But, you know, like from that perspective, I wouldn't say the hardware is a failure, but it's definitely not performing as well as they want. And I don't think it's software all along yet. I don't. I think software has been updated at a steady pace, but No, I think that the hardware is underperforming.
Oh, yeah, the hardware is clearly underperforming.
From what they wanted, not objectively from where it should be.
I mean, and from just what it's priced at, I think you're generally getting what you're paying for from RDNA 3. So from that perspective, no, it's not really a hardware failure. Is it less impressive than it could have been? I suppose. But I don't think we're ever going to see like a situation where you saw from like the original GCN, where GCN eventually basically caught up to its competitors, where I don't think the 7900 XTX is going to compete with the 4090 in performance.
Mm-hmm.
Although, crossing my fingers because I do have one.
Right, that you got for half the price of a 4090, to be fair, so you won't be complaining if it doesn't. Well, we're already getting on the subject, so let us move on then with story number 5. RX 7800 XT and RX 7700 XT announced. Quoting again from AMD, built on the groundbreaking AMD RDNA 3 trademarked 3 architecture, the new graphics cards provide cutting-edge hardware and software features designed to deliver fully immersive 1440p gameplay at 60 plus frames per second and significantly better performance per dollar compared to the competition across select titles. The 7800 XT and 7700 XT graphics cards feature 16 gigabytes and 12 gigabytes of RAM, respectively, of GDDR6 memory, and up to 50% higher memory bandwidth in the competition for high-resolution gaming. They also support advanced features that take performance and visual fidelity to the next level. This is AMD's writing, including all new AMD Hyper RX technology. It's not out yet, though. I don't think AMD.
At some point.
At some point, trademarked. The RX 7800 XT has a $499 MSRP and features 60 compute units, and the 7700 XT will be listed for $449 US and include 54 compute units. They have a 263 and 245 watt TDPs respectively, and launch on September 6th. Now, we already did a die shrink where we talked about them pretty in depth. Subscribe to the Moore's Laws at Patreon for just $2 a month. You'll get these bonus episodes. So we recorded that right after the show. So we got a lot of our gut reactions, which I think was name for 7800 XT, stupid. Name for 7700 XT, fair. I mean, it has 25% more compute units than last gen, and it's better per compute unit, and it's actually a lower MSRP than the 6700 XT. So that one on paper is fine, but the 7800 XT naming is ridiculous. It should be called the 7800, and the way they price them relative to each other, we believe, is weird. Even if you remove the 7800 XT and you're like, 7700 XT pricing's fair, right? But why is it priced that way relative to the other? Why not make it like I thought even like 439 and 509? Like make it like about 20% apart. People will pay $510 for a 7800 XT. They will, AMD. It's that good for the price. Why not? I don't understand, but anything to add on to what I just said, or any thoughts now that I think it's been a week since these have been announced or something?
I mean, yeah, my thoughts are largely the same. It's just why I think the 7800 XT at $500 compared to all the other stuff on the market right now looks great. I think it probably lowers price performance, it improves price performance to a degree than what's even available to the market right now. The 7700 XT, it in isolation, not looking at the 7800 XT, I think is fairly priced against like the 4060 Ti, where it seems like you're going to be getting slightly better performance, a bit more RAM than the 8 gigabyte model, a bit less RAM than the 16 gigabyte model, and they're just putting it smack dab in the middle of those two. So I think there's a strong argument that 450 is fair, even though I think it would look a little bit better against them at like 430. But it's just when you put them together, it's like, well, it feels like you're just trying to make the 7800 XT sell, and you don't want anybody to buy the 7700 XT. Because if you're building a new system with one of these in it, presumably you're spending at least, $1,200, $1,300 on your system, I would expect. Why wouldn't you just pay the extra $50 to go from 4060 Ti performance to 4070 performance?
Or better than 4060 Ti. It should still be like 10 to 20% better,
Yeah. So It's it's
like,
just
I'm trying to think of a good way to put it, to go from like 3070 Ti performance or something, to 3080 performance. Why would you not pay $50?
yeah, it's just really weirdly priced, and then you also get 30% more RAM on top of that. I just don't get what they were thinking about only having there be $50 between them. But other than that, 7800 XT looks great.
Well, yeah, and I mean, one thing just to add a wrinkle here is in the video I put out last week about this, a leak I had in there is, at least as far as I could tell, and I'm not sure what the exact breakup is. It could be something like 30% of them are 7700 XTs, but that's still not enough to like just try to get you to buy the 7800 XT, right? Like, it would have to be like a tenth of the supply is that, and that is, I'm told that's not the case. It's a notable amount, maybe 50%, maybe 40 or 30, but it's a notable amount of the supply. It's not priced like they don't have any of them. So I don't know. I really don't know, because that's what my overall point would be, like, with it, why the pricing is weird. If you have 50-50, even if you have 70-30%, 70% 7800 XT, why not? You can charge probably $20 more or something for the 7800 XT, and then charge $10 less for the other. They'll both sell. So I don't, like, just do it. Like, either way, the overall profit average will be the same. It just looks less. It's just less bizarre. And the only thing I can think of is, I don't know, that they just hope the 7800 XT sells out, then this keeps selling, and over time they shift supply to the other one, because long term I can't imagine they have a ton of bad yields either for a 200 millimeter squared 5 nanometer die. So it's just weird overall. I don't know why AMD does a lot of the things they do though. So
the only other big brain move I could imagine is if they're trying to like clear out the remaining like $430 stock of like 6800s or something.
That is what it probably is. I was told they still have quite a lot of Navi 22 sitting around. So, yep, I think you answered it, that if they made it 400 or something, they're worried it would be bumping too close to those.
Yeah. So I guess
probably what it is.
The other possibility.
It's tough shit, AMD. Like, I mean, god dang it, And again, I've leaked that the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte model is probably going to have some SKUs showing up around 450. I think that's, whether it's fair or not, going to push it down to like 420, 430 anyway. So I don't know. Mark writes in and he said, "Oh, hi, Mark." And he says, "I like the 7800 XT. It's pretty close to the sweet spot established by the 5700 XT years ago. And versus the 4090, the 7800 XT is nearly 2/3 the raw performance. My lower estimate is 50. Well, 2/3. No, it's like half the performance, my dude. Because the 4090 is, in some games, double the performance of a 3090, which is a little better than a 6800 XT. So I think this is close to double the half the performance of a 4090. But anyways, while handily beating all surrounding NVIDIA offerings at $500, and at least then it's a third the price of the 4090 or less than that. This is essentially what the 5700 XT did versus Turin and the 1080 Ti years ago, and I'm glad to see it. No, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles yet, but yes, it uses a bit more power than the 4060 Ti, but I think it's worth buying. I've seen a lot of people say they think this is going to be a seller, and like, not just in the comments, but retailers are like, dude, this is what the 4070 should have been. If you think of what this is compared to the $500 3070, which sold like hotcakes, this thing doubles the RAM and is like 30 to 40% higher performance for the same price a few years later. This is what people want out of a gen over gen performance increase at the same price point. In fact, it even comes with Starfield. So I've seen an outpouring of like not just comments, but analysts and retailers think this is going to sell very well.
I would be surprised if the 7800 XT doesn't sell well. Like this feels like the first good or well-priced card to come out in like a year. So
yeah, I agree. Bfish writes in and he says, "Hi, Tom and Dan. Any update on Navi 31 or 32 in laptops? Video cards put out some leak that the 7900 GRE die could go to laptop. Well, I doubt AMD would love places to sell more products. Your previous leaks stated that no AMD seemed interested in high-end mobile laptop AMD cards. And so do you think they're ever going to do this? So I don't know which video card coverage you're talking about, but I know recently they've referenced my leak of that Navi 3132 hybrid die. But I also know that they've referenced random anime pictures or whatever on Twitter that have basically said what I said months ago, and I guess that also gets an article. So I don't know who's quoting what here, but look, my overall opinion on Navi 31 or the 3132 hybrid coming to laptop is, it's small enough, and even Vega 56 got a laptop release. Look it up, everybody. There were laptops with Vega 56. So eventually, I'd be surprised if anyone, Corsair, Asus, the Chinese company Xiaomi, didn't have some 7900M eventually. But I just heavily doubt you're going to be like, and here's the Dell, HP, and Lenovo offerings all at the same time. But again, right, you think like someone probably will, but just because it's designed and able to do it doesn't mean it's going to get widespread adoption. And no OEM I've talked to is talking about launching it right now. So I'd be surprised if it happened in a bunch of them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess for me, I don't know how much those OEM laptops would be priced at anyways. Laptops seem to be out of whack anyways at this point, and I don't know how much a $5,000 7900 laptop would help the market anyways. So
yeah, I mean, we're talking about something if they min-maxed it appropriately between 80 and 96 compute units with fast GDDR6. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it can totally beat 4080 laptops, which remember are just not even 4070 Ti's. I mean, in specs, and below that in performance. So I think they could compete in high end, but unless you're going to tell me you're bringing this level of performance with 16 gigs of RAM to laptops at $2,000, I don't want it for $3,000, right? Yeah. Like, this is just stupid. And then comes the thing of the OEM just asking the unfortunate question, fair or not, is anyone going to buy a laptop with an AMD GPU and a AMD sticker for $2,000?
Yeah. Not many. I mean, the answer is not many people, and I think in the desktop space, there's already a bias against that. And I think once you get to laptops, that bias is even worse, which will be interesting to see how they advertise like Strix and stuff when that comes out, because they're going to have to get past that advertising.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I hear Ryzen commands a name. I just think it's the Radeon sticker people don't care about, so they'll probably just... But it's an APU. It's Ryzen. Everyone loves Ryzen APUs. And there's a real question if they put APU in the title, people will go, oh, I want that. But separate, I don't want it. All right. Let us now move on to story number 6. Getting out and enjoying the weather, or is it too hot to get outside? Well, either way, whether you're looking for an easy meal on the go or something quick and delicious while you're cooped up inside, Vite Ramen has you covered. This piece of content is brought to you by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers tons of options for eating healthy. Their classic packages make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, including new flavors like Radiant Crab Ryu. And also their Ramen Go packages offer a healthy microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break away from home. Or they even have other healthy products like Nano Boost Powder that makes any food at least a little healthy. Click on the link in the description and use the offer code BROKENSILICON to save 10% on a variety of products, including special bundles for Moore's Law Z fans, raw nudes if you want to make up your own recipes, and other food products, powders, cooking utensils, and more. They are a plucky, small, but rapidly growing company that has been good to Moore's Law is dead for years. So, supporting them helps support me, and even just clicking on the link below makes a big difference for Moore's Law is Dead. But I really do like their products, and I recommend you try them as well. So check out Vite Ramen today. Really? Couldn't keep the glasses on for more than a minute? Early Navi 43 and 44 performance and specs leak out. On August 18th, yours truly leaked a few interesting details about Navi 43 and Navi 44 products. Multiple sources stated that they were mid-range. And there's been a lot of consternation out there recently when, I believe Kepler, someone else on Twitter, and then I followed up with like a whole report about why it seems like Navi 4C or Navi 41 and 42 are likely canceled. A lot of people were saying, well, if it's Navi 43, then that means this thing's going to suck. But the leak I put out suggested everyone said mid-range for both of them. Both Navi 43 and Navi 44 are distinctly labeled as mid-range, meaning from my perspective, I would assume that Navi 44 then is at least in the performance tier for next year and the following year that we see Navi 33 in now, at a minimum, if they're calling it mid-range, I'd say. Mm-hmm. And I think it's worth, remembering that, I also put out that there was a pitch for 64 compute units as the design for Navi 43, and then 32 for Navi 44. It's not confirmed this is what they went with, but one of my contacts saw a presentation months ago and said they were considering this, at least in the past. So let's just say that if they were going with 64 compute units, even on 4 nanometer instead of a combination of 5 and 6, and it had GDDR7, which can have, arguably double the bandwidth of GDDR6, I just don't think it's insane to think that even a 250 millimeter square die or something could beat Navi 32 or even come up to Navi 31 performance. And that's really what this leak was all about. In fact, actually at Hot Chips, this is a little off subject, but it comes back here. Phoenix doubles the transistor count between Rembrandt and Phoenix. It is double the transistors and a 15% smaller die because it went from 6 to 4 nanometer. That means they could go, if they took Navi 33, 200 millimeter square die, they could get to Navi 32 transistor counts possibly. So I think people are really sleeping on what this means. Even if it was a 300 millimeter squared or smaller monolithic die, it's going to 4 nanometer and it has access to GDDR7, which nothing has access to right now. It could still be as strong as current gen flagships, which is exciting. And another important part of that leak, though, was that I added some context to AMD canceling Navi 4C, that it wasn't because they don't think they could get it to work. It's just they know it would have cost a boatload of money in the tail end of development, and they don't think anyone wants $1,500 flagships right now. And if anything went wrong, they don't think it would have been worth the money, especially when it's not just about silicon capacity, but the packaging line, like the assembly line at TSMC that packages these things together, that would have been competing with MI300 and 400 assembly. So that's probably why they canceled it too. But anyways, what do you think about this leak? It was meant to be kind of a more optimistic argument for why, if you're so mad at top RDNA 4 being canceled, it still might be what you want it to be anyways.
Yeah, if it's 64 compute units, I would be surprised if it matched top Navi 31, but I don't know. It's believable that it could reach like 7900 XT levels, and I don't know if it did that. That wouldn't be a terrible new generation if it were low enough priced, and if they are further developing their software stack a lot more. I think this is kind of a generation that we've talked about being desirable. Obviously, I would prefer, even if it's only beating the 7900 XTX by like 10%, I would prefer it does that than lose to the 7900 XTX. But these things happen. I do think from like a public perception view, if it doesn't beat a 7900 XTX, that would be a pretty bad look for it. A pretty bad PR look, unless they sold it for like $500.
$500. Well, they could though. If it's going from Navi 32, which is a $500 card, 200 millimeter squared of 5 nanometer, and then what is that, like 130 millimeter squared of 6 nanometer? This could just be 300 millimeter squared of 4 nanometer alone, which isn't that much more expensive or any more expensive than 5. So there's a chance you could be looking at something that they could sell for $500, certainly less than $600. And that's where it becomes, if it beats the 7900 XTX and therefore is around a 4090 even for less than half the price of a 4090, well, I think everyone's way more excited about that. For me, I think it needs to match the 7900 XT. Like, that's what Polaris did. It didn't like beat the 290X, certainly not the 390X, but it was kind of there. It needs to be as good as the 7900 XT for 500 or less. That's what it really needs to do, I think.
Yeah, and if you had something like that, that could be a new 580 type card. That
RX 580.
RX 580 type card that like kind of rebalances the market, which once again, we've talked about that before too. Like that's the advantages of a quote unquote stagnant market is one, you're not going up year over year in performance, prices fall.
Which is what happened during the 28 nanometer stagnation era. You know, from Kepler, 2 generations of Kepler and Maxwell, and then multiple generations of GCN. I mean, we had pricing get absurdly low, and it's because performance and efficiency weren't increasing as fast as they used to. You know, Lovelace doubles performance and radically increases efficiency. It also costs a kidney to make.
Yeah, and like obviously, I think everyone would prefer to have rapid decreases in price and increases in performance, but that's just not how it goes. And sometimes you have to pick one or the other. I think the grand majority of the market is satisfied with even mid-range performance at this point. So stagnation in top level performance might be what's better for most people.
Yeah, well, and I think, look, Ampere and RDNA 2, big performance uplift. Lovelace, again, a big performance uplift. And actually, RDNA 3, although it fell short of expectations, I mean, everyone has to acknowledge that it's like 50% better than the 6900 XT and like 35-40% better than the 6950 XT. That's a typical generational uplift. So it wasn't a small one either. We're there. We got the performance. But devs aren't going to do anything if the only way to get to absurd frame rates is to spend $2,000, because no one has that. But if everyone below, between $300 and $500 had access to this performance, well, then games will use that as the baseline. And I think that's why it'd be much more impactful too in development and like actually making graphics and gameplay better. Resident Mexican writes in. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, because that can be the other issue with rapidly increasing performance is it's just like, oh yeah, the textures get way higher resolution to a degree that you don't even notice what they're improving anymore, or they just start tessellating random things, or a series of random BS to push that new level of performance that doesn't functionally give you anything.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you'd say developers still haven't even caught up to CPUs. Our CPUs are so much stronger than what we had 5 years ago.
I know.
That I think we're just starting to see developers do things with it. And it would be, even next year, it would be better if we got crazy CPU performance at 500 or lower than if there was some crazy tiled absurdity that costs $1,000 to get to something new. You want flagship of last gen to get cheaper, or the uplifts aren't really going to help gamers.
Yeah.
Resident Mexican writes in and says, hello, Tom and Dan. Since you leaked that high-end RDNA 4 is canceled, do you think that AMD will take this opportunity to work extra hard on their software features and drivers? Even though AMD GPUs usually has better overall price to performance, they're always behind on software features, it feels like, lately. Yes. And that's something I brought up with high yield. I realized live during our conversation. I think there's, you look at DLSS 3.5 next to FSR 3 and you go, is there a point in AMD trying to charge $2,000? Like, let's say AMD launched Navi 4C, which we leaked the configuration of it on the last Broken Silicon, News Broken Silicon. Do you think there would be a point in AMD launching a $2,000 graphics card that beats NVIDIA's $1,800 5090, let's say, if its software was just way worse? Is any enthusiast actually going to choose the $2,000 AMD card, even if it wins by 20% in raster, if FSR is way behind? I know my answer is no. They need to catch up in software unless they can launch something that has like 50% more raster for the same price. But I don't think Navi 4C would have. I think it would have cost more to make, and people aren't going to spend more for AMD unless they catch up to NVIDIA and everything. I think they're going to be taking their time next year to solve this problem, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, you have to look at it. If Navi 33, or not 33, if Navi 43 is going to end up having 64 compute units, just imagine what 31 was supposed to have. I mean, if they would have launched that would have been presumably a massive
I
gen
think
over gen uplift.
Conservatively, I think probably 144.
Yeah, and I don't know if that means that now AMD is selling cards for $2,000. I don't really care.
Yeah. Right. You got the 7900 XTX because you got it for $800 with Resident Evil 4. It may have been like $850. I don't know.
Yeah.
And you were never going to get it for $1,500. So you're more happy it actually went down in price.
Yes.
Sans writes in and he says, hello, fellow nerds. Do you think that AMD will reuse the Navi 31 and 32 packaging for lower end die configurations in the future? An example could be some sort of, I don't know, Navi 53 configuration, having two MCDs using 6 nanometer and then one 100 millimeter squared 3 nanometer GCD. I actually put this on the script days ago and thought about it ahead of time. Like, my answer is I guess I could see them trying that. But there was a variant of Navi 33 that was just that. Like there were two versions they had on the table. One that had more compute units, bandwidth, and the ability to have not just, I think, MCDs, but stack them. So a lot stronger. And then an option for this monolithic 200 millimeter squared 6 nanometer offering we got today in the 7600. And they said they didn't think it was worth the chiplets. They didn't think it was worth it. Like the performance increase, the price to make it was not worth it. If they made that decision last year, I'm going to assume they're not going to change their mind next year, right? And when I hear that Navi 43 and 44 are both monolithic, which I do hear that, I don't think so. I just don't think. And, you know, honestly, anything that's below 200 millimeter squared should probably be monolithic, usually or almost always, right? The only reason, by the way, I think Ryzen on desktop uses 3 chiplets is because it shares it with Epic. That's it. Like,
yeah, that makes sense.
If it didn't share it with Epic, I don't think they would have made that a monolithic.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not a reason, like what he says. I mean, how big would that total package even be? Like, yeah, that would be less than 200 millimeters. So
yeah. So why make 2 MCDs and a 100 millimeter squared die if you can make a 130 millimeter squared total 3 nanometer die that's even more efficient and probably doesn't cost that much more to make at a certain point? I think that's what they would choose to do. In fact, I'd even argue I don't know if they should have made Navi 32.
Yeah.
I think unless they made Navi 31 bigger, and then that's why they had that. I almost honestly wonder if like they only needed one die they cut down. I really do wonder that to this day.
Yeah.
Technolads writes in, just finished watching your RDNA 4 video, and I think it made me realize that I might have mild ADHD because I kept watching 2-minute sections and then kept going back, doing something else at the same time. Noticed I missed so much information and started over. I think it took me 3 hours to finish your 27-minute video. Honestly, I do have diagnosed ADHD, have for most of my life, Technolads, and I do that sometimes with videos, like especially like a complex like real life lore or Payroon YouTube video or something. I'll like, oh, let me do this while I'm doing something else, and like, or like economics explained, and I'm like, I missed the entire argument for why this economy works that way. Like, I need to start over. I think there are some videos I've had to watch like 3 times, even though they're 15 minutes long. But anyways, this question: how do you think Navi 43 and laptops will be branded? Do you think it will be 8700M, 8800M? Do you think we could see Asus switch back to AMD in their G14 with RDNA 4, since those usually use mid-range dies anyways, and have something that demolishes the 4090 mobile before NVIDIA has a Blackwell offering? If that is the case, would there be a possibility that NVIDIA could release 8102 on laptop? No, it's too big. At least within reason. Like, it's anything's possible, but widespread, no, that's too big of a die. I mean, I don't know. Right now, I think they call the 7600 the 7700M. So I think you've got your answer probably right there. And if what NVIDIA is doing in laptop, which remember, AMD is competing with NVIDIA, not in a vacuum, is anything to go by, I mean,
it'll probably be an 8800M. Right?
I mean, it could be. I mean, NVIDIA is calling their 4060 Ti die a 4070 8 gigabyte on laptop. So if that trend continues, yeah, I'd expect them to call it an 8700M, which, you know, Strix Halo is 40 compute units of RDNA 3.5. So we're looking at a dedicated card here that's probably double the performance or something, maybe, of Strix Halo. Yeah, I think 8700 then at least.
Yeah, I mean, it also remains to be seen what they'll even call next gen anyways. Like, who knows? Maybe they'll call the Navi 43, the 8800 XT or something.
If it comes out, I think they would consider that if it beat the 7900 XTX.
Yeah.
Although, from what I've heard, 8700 XT is still the thought.
Okay.
So I would recommend to them that be what they do, but they just launched a 7800 XT that's really a 7800 or arguably 7700 XT at best. So who knows what's going on anymore. QH Freddy writes in and he asks, will NVIDIA ditch the high-end gaming market actually mean that they stop making a 103 die and only sell 102 dies and Quadro cards? What if they just make the 102 die smaller and basically say, if you want more AI performance, you have to go with the big pure compute A100, H100 like cards? What if they just ditch 102 and 103 class dies altogether? Oh, so he's talking about, like, I've heard, like, if NVIDIA comes to the conclusion that people aren't interested in buying $2,000 graphics cards, they might say, all right, 103 die it is, called it the 6080 and we're out.
Mm-hmm.
He's like saying, do you think they would actually even stop making 103 or what would they do? Yeah, I mean, I think what you'd probably see is one of two things. I mean, they'd focus more on like the Hopper end of it, where maybe they'll have several dies just for AI, and then they have a 103 die that's their biggest one. I think that, yeah, that is what they would do in this scenario. Or the alternative is they do have a 102 die, but kind of actually, we've seen this before, people, like Kepler, it comes out way later than the main gaming dies that they're calling a stronger card than they really are. And the Titan wasn't when it first came out, but it's heavily cut down. Let's remember the 3090 is like cut down 4% over the 3090 Ti that eventually came out, and also the A6000 from back then. The 4090 is cut down, I believe, 12%. So I could see what happens is there's a 5090 that's cut down like 25% or something. Like this is the yields they're not selling to prosumers. And then they just always leave that option to launch like a 30% stronger 5090 Ti if there's ever a threat whatsoever. I think that's what we'll see at first. And eventually I don't know. Maybe they design 103 dies that are right up against the 2 nanometer reticle limit of like 400 millimeters squared. And then that's where they stop.
I mean, yeah, there's a possibility, I suppose. I mean,
remember the 1080 Ti is a 102 die that I think's like 450 millimeters squared. So they already got close to the die size of a 103 die already in a previous gen.
Yeah, I mean, I know their internal code names, so there's probably more of a rigid reason of why they call them the things they do, but they can swap the names around to an extent still.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe they just end up calling what would normally be the 103 die or something the 102 die, and that's cut down version of that still gets to gamers.
Okay, Hayubu writes in and says, hello, Tom. I've been a listener for a few years now. Well, thank you. And I just recently became a patron. Well, thank you and welcome. On Broken Silicon 219, you mentioned the 4090 did it in terms of performance to enable photorealism, among other things. And now the next challenge was to make that level of performance affordable to the mainstream, so developers will actually build games for that level of performance. Will the next generation, not refreshes or mid-gen updates of consoles, do that? I think so. I mean, rumors I've seen of the PS5 Pro, which, to be fair, I can only verify there is a PS5 Pro design. I don't have, from my sources, the specs of it. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's, at least I trust Kepler, and he's talked about it a little bit, on Twitter. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's going to be double the performance of a PS5, at least. So we're being honest, pretty close to 7900 XTX. I would assume the PlayStation 6 will at least double that performance in 4 years or something.
Probably at least double.
Yeah, maybe so 3X. Maybe 4X it. And so, yeah, I think we'll be well beyond 4090 performance in the PlayStation 6. And we'll probably have games that go for photorealism at 60 hertz or 45 hertz. And there will be some games that just choose to not be photorealistic, say they locked 120 hertz. Mm-hmm. But I think we're absolutely with the PlayStation 6, we're going to see that. All right. Well, let us move on from all of the stories that I actually enjoy covering to the one that I feel like I have to cover at gunpoint with story number 7. I just labeled this Linus Tech Tips controversy. There will be links in the description. I think for the most part, actually, what I've seen over the past, it's funny. I think this all came out actually right after the last news episode in my live stream, which thank you, Fate. I didn't want to have to cover that without taking time to decide if I want to or not. I didn't want to have a knee-jerk opinion on this really for two reasons. Like, number one, I don't care that much. It's not that I don't care about some of the things alleged. It's just I want to talk about Zen 5, Arrow Lake, Blackwell, and RDNA 4, not drama. This is not a drama covering channel. So even if some of it's serious, if you have seen a lack of us covering it, I guess it was a deliberate decision, but it wasn't a deliberate decision like tactic 5D chess for views. It was, I don't care to talk about it. I do care about some of the things, but I don't care to talk about it. If I don't care to talk about it, the number one thing I've noticed in my videos that do well is I was excited to talk about the subjects. And some channels were, and some of their videos were good. Some of them apparently were complete garbage. But they probably did them because they had something to say. And I just didn't have that much to say. And I do think a lot of people in the comments have said they've enjoyed just the usual coverage here, where some channels in a slow news week seem to just cover drama. I tried harder to get Zen 5 and RDNA 4 leaks. But that's my spiel out of the way. I kind of tasked you with covering this story, Dan. How would you summarize what's happened here? Because it all started, of course, with Gamers Nexus alleging or putting out a video critiquing would be a nice way to put it, Linus Tech Tips. What happened?
So, I mean, I would say, so from what I can tell, it seems like Linus had like a behind-the-scenes video where one of their engineers or something said something that kind of seemed like they were taking a shot at Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed specifically, where they said, and we can redo all of our testing with everyone, unlike these two, which I did think was a weird thing to specifically call out Hardware Unboxed and Gamers Nexus, who I don't want to say like anyone does the best because I watch a bunch of different channels and I think all of them do different things well. But I think they're two of the best benchmarking channels on YouTube, certainly. And I think Gamers Nexus took that as his cue to put out a pretty big hit job on Linus Tech Tips, calling out a lot of their errors over the past year, I would say. And I don't want to cover the errors too specifically. Gamers Nexus put out a 40-minute video. The majority of it was that. I think if you watch Linus Tech Tips regularly, you've noticed that to some extent that they've been.
I remember us commenting on that like a month ago or 2 months ago. Certainly earlier this year, I would say the first half of this year, there was a point where I don't remember if we said it in a podcast, but we were like, I don't know if we need to cover their reviews anymore because I found a massive error in one of them. And it was I'm not Hardware Unboxed or Gamers Nexus. Like, I sometimes catch things that I don't think they do, but if I caught something really quick that was like a technical error in testing, when that's not my job, that's an issue that ever got through Linus Tech Tips. And I thought they were improving a month ago, but then actually in recent content, there were seeming to be more errors again. So sorry, continue.
Yeah, and I know some of the commentary has been to an extent like at Gamers Nexus, don't throw stones in glass houses. I think Gamers Nexus, I'm sure errors get into every major benchmarking channels testing from time to time. I've never noticed anything as glaring as what I saw in Linus Tech Tips as of, like, I would say Lovelace onwards. And then they covered other, I would say, more serious ethical issues and less negligence issues where I would say these are pretty... Linus is supposedly investing in certain companies and giving those companies' products positive reviews. Well, it might be public that he's making those investments. I think that's each person's own. I don't know what line you think crosses an ethical barrier. I would just say take like Noctua reviews from Linus with a grain of salt. I think their videos are generally pretty good. Even you can generally tell when something is a quote unquote paid for. But I do think if it's a direct investment, that's crossing a different ethical line than if you're doing like a paid for review. So that's not good. And then there was the other issue where seems like they kind of stole a prototype piece from like a startup company that makes power blocks, while simultaneously giving it a negative review in their testing because they didn't actually test it on the card it was designed for. All of that's really bad. So in my view, none of this stuff is quote unquote like cancelable. I think it's just suggests that ethically and as far as their testing goes, they've fallen off a cliff as of late. And then they put immediately after Gamers Nexus, Nexus's video, they put out
I heard the response was like worse than even the allegation. Well, not worse than the allegation, but made it way worse than saying nothing probably would have.
Yeah, they put out a blog post where Linus, I couldn't actually find the blog post. I don't know if that's just because it's hard to find specific posts on there if it's deleted. But I linked here. I sent you a timestamp video from Gamers Nexus's follow-up video to their original video that shows a screenshot of their blog post, where I think a really big point is that in this blog post, Linus specifies that they didn't sell this prototype power block. They auctioned it off. That's like, I think you're missing the substantive point. And then later they put out, I would say, a better video where they said, yeah, we've noticed that our stuff has been lowering in quality over time. And we're going to have an independent review board review our stuff now. And they're trying to be more ethically above board, which is good. But I think you need to see, all right, this is their testing period over the next 4 months. What are their reviews going to look like? Are they going to improve? Are there going to be fewer errors?
Well, and earlier this year, me and you, like I said, agreed, oh man, their quality's fallen off a cliff. And then there was like a month where we were like, seems to be getting better. And then it fell off a cliff again. Is it going to get better for 4 months, then just go to shit again?
Yeah. So that, as far as their like testing and the substantive things that like make it to their channel go, those are the big things from Linus Tech Tips. And then I think it needs to be mentioned, although you have to acknowledge that it's a he said, she said. These allegations aren't directly linked to Linus, but people at the company. Obviously, Linus Tech Tips is a boys club. If you watch their response video to Gamers Nexus, notice the male to female ratio of employees in that room. There's like one woman in that entire video. But,
yeah.
A former employee at Linus Tech Tips came out and said that she was constantly belittled, sexually harassed, and apparently groped several times, which is bad.
That last one especially, it's like,
and then
there's no, I misinterpreted there.
it took me a few days to like read this because she posted all of this on Twitter, and I hate the way Twitter does threads, and this is like dozens of tweets.
Well, they fixed it, Dan. It's now called X.
Oh, thank God. So this is like a dozens of tweet long thread, and it's just like, if you're going to do that, can you just put out a blog post? But I linked a screenshot of the most substantive thing I think she puts out that could speak negatively to the reputation of the company and not just individuals there, where she says she was essentially taken out of videos when she pressed the issue on sexual harassment, which is really bad if that's true.
And again, it's like, it's fundamentally a he said, she said thing. And unless some video or more proof comes out, but yeah, it sounds like it's a very believable allegation at a minimum. It's hard for me to talk about it because I don't. It's hard.
Yeah,
I'm a evidence-based person, and I don't want to get into why I am inclined to believe here, but I am, but then I say that I feel it's always a tricky thing to talk about.
Yeah. He said, she said situations are always hard to talk about because you don't want to assume someone's lying, but you don't want to say somebody is guilty before they've been proven guilty.
But it seems like we do not think she's lying.
Yeah. And I believe in their video, they said that they're going to look into those allegations more specifically. But I mean, if it's true that she was not fired, but taken out of like content because she was initially hired because she was like there as a guest and people liked her, so they just hired her full time. So if she was taken out of content because of the fact that she was pressing being sexually harassed, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, that's very bad.
So that's the situation. I mean, I don't think anything that's come out is necessarily we should be raising pitchforks at like Linus specifically, but I would say that company needs an overhaul if they want to be continue to be viewed as like a valuable channel in the space, I would say. Because I for the longest time, like I thought Linus Tech Tips was a great middle ground between like geeky and the like
lighter, quicker entertainment, and the quicker, not 30-minute videos like me or Gamers Nexus or Hardware Unboxed does. 10-minute videos that quick.
Yeah,
you know, it was a good middle ground. You know, at its best, but at its worst, it was like, how much money do you guys have? And you put this out with zero. Like again, like it wasn't sold, it was auctioned. Who approved that? Apparently, nobody. It was just posted.
Yeah, because like, well, if you're putting out reviews that are less in depth than like some of the channels that don't get as many views, like Hardware Unboxing, Gamers Nexus, although they're still huge channels in their own right.
Yeah.
If 10 times more people are watching a Linus Tech Tips review and like a quarter of their benchmarks have some error in them, well, how much good is that actually doing for informing people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, because I won't say the names of the channels, but there are some channels that benchmark that can't seem to do anything competently, and yet people are watching them. It'd be nice if there was someone in the middle there. And there was sometimes where it seemed like they were, but sometimes where I was like, well, if you're only entertainment, I have no reason to ever watch anything you do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, would you say anything else? I guess let me just get this reader mail. Dova X writes in and says, hello, Tom and Dan. Well, Tom and Dan. I don't know if that's an intentional slight or not, but I think it is. What are your thoughts about the issues of the relationship between Linus Tech Tips and brands like Noctua or Asus? Context, and here's a timestamp to it. Did you look into this? What is the context here?
The context is that they have some like co-branded Noctua screwdrivers or something. So obviously they have a brand deal and they typically positively review Noctua parts. So I mean, not good. But in general, if you're upfront that something is a quote unquote paid for review or something like that, I don't think it's crossing that big of an ethical boundary. But if he has like stake in some of these companies and he's doing reviews for some of these companies, that's, I think, crossing a barrier that they need to put a stop to as well.
Yeah. I don't know any of these specific things because I really only checked Linus Tech Tips if there was something really weird they were doing, like they set up 16K, how hard does it crush your performance? I just thought that was interesting. Mm-hmm. Or, they reviewed the 4080, so I guess let me watch this. Video's only like, shorter than everyone else's, so I can throw this on top for another opinion before I get to my analysis. But what I'm saying is I always skipped any of those videos anyway, so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the problem is I typically only watch their reviews. So the more questionable content by them, I think I probably just miss by default because I'm less interested in those videos.
Yeah, it's interesting too when they do their videos, like how much of it has merch, like just constantly. And from what I can tell, because at least we made enough money to pay me, you, Gerard, like so we can churn out multiple pieces of content a week that I think we keep high quality. I've noticed like you want a base from Patreon typically. Then you grow with ads. I've seen Colin Moriarty at Sacred Symbols basically confirm this too. Like, then the ads can become a much larger proportion than you'd think. After that is when you go for merch. It's really not worth trying to sell merch to 200 people. But once you get into the tens of millions, that's where actually merch, they may be making more money in merch than their ad deals. If they're selling it to millions of people. And it's just interesting to see how much of that there is. And you just got to, that's why I think, for the size of our channel, the amount of patrons we have is huge. And I think trying to focus on that first means if you get this feeling, and what I'm about to do for an ad deal, does this feel a little crummy? The more people you have in a strong base with a strong Patreon, which I believe Gamers Nexus also does, means the more likely you are to go, we don't need that money. We're already getting enough from it here. Mm-hmm. And I will say, maybe they need to reevaluate that too.
Yeah, I mean
it's constant in their videos.
There's a lot
to judge.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I think Linus Tech Tips needs to reevaluate. But
Carrie No Sugata writes in and asks, if I was asked what value computers can have to a company, I would start by saying reducing costs through automation and increasing revenue by offering new products or services. In that light, I find it a bit strange that trying to automate game benchmarking is so criticized. I can certainly understand a bad implementation and then being criticized for that, but why would the inherent concept be bad? Do you think there is potential value in automating game benchmarking? And if so, what would you suggest the minimum requirements should be in order for it to be viable? And P.S. To be clear, I'm not suggesting that everything involved with game benchmarking should be automated. There will always be a role for subjective analysis. If anything, the more that data gathering can be automated, the more time there should be for subjective analysis. In theory, I agree with everything you said, Carrie. I don't really disagree at all. I think you have to have some degree of automated benchmarking and maybe at least one or two canned benchmarks in a review, just so it's crazy easy for everybody to check your results.
Mhm.
Like, that is a thing in and of itself. Like, when you see every reviewer say, well, I tested this part of Assassin's Creed and it's kind of here, but sometimes they upload the exact section where they walked, and you can even download something to follow the same footsteps. That's good. But if you're not doing that, it's kind of hard for me to check your work. So I think some amount of canned benchmarking is useful, and then automating the benchmarking process, I think that just makes sense for a part of the review, but there has to be qualitative real world testing next to it. And a lot of reviews don't do that. And it's because it takes time. But I mean, is it really a review? And if you're one of these places that has a house of 200 people working there, can you not literally pay someone to play with 2 graphics cards for a day? I mean, and I think you have to, because you're never going to get a good perspective on what it's actually like to get a product unless you actually use it. So I think it's all about both streamlining what you can so that it's repeatable, quantitative testing, and then doing a bunch of qualitative gaming and going, the 4070 doesn't feel actually better than the 3090 did. It feels about the same, if not worse,
Yeah, and to a degree, if you don't do that, I just think you can lose sight of what you're doing.
Yeah. But if you only do automated benchmarking, you can miss crazy things.
Yeah.
And that's why I think you always have to do both. But I don't know. Do you have anything else to say about the Linus Tech Tips stuff?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. All right. I don't either. And I'm exhausted. So let's get through this here. All right. Let us then move on to the wrap up. These are the final stories that don't get their own story because we just didn't have time or didn't think it was worth it. And actually, we already had 7. We usually only have 6. But they are worth mentioning. Number 1, Dragon Range X got reviewed, and surprise, it's the fastest gaming laptop processor.
Yeah, not really a surprise, but
also the Intel leaks that this channel put out about Granite Rapids, entirely confirmed at Hot Chips by Intel. 2 I/O chiplets and then compute chiplets with memory controllers on them. Exclusively confirmed here. I believe some websites covered it, but I feel like that went a little undercovered, and I'm just pointing this out now. Guys, we also leaked what Diamond Rapids looks like, so no one acts surprised when Intel confirms it in in a year or something. But so that was exciting. Also, Intel failed to acquire a company called Tower. What is it? Tower Semiconductor. I bring this up only because I am told directly by one of my best contacts that this is very, very, very bad for Intel, and that they needed Tower Semiconductor to handle some of the work they did. Otherwise, maybe they just can't keep up with AMD. So I'm just pointing this out because and this was someone who told me it was going to go down, how it was going to go down, and it went down how this person said it would. So I take this pretty seriously, that I think this means, once again, Intel's going to have to make more cuts throughout the company because they can't afford to do everything they were trying to do unless they acquired that other company. Also, the RX 6750 Golden Rabbit Edition, I was actually saving a few details I had about this for some leak, like if I did a musings combination micro leak video, or it came to, it seems like most of the cats, or I should say most of the rabbits, out of the bag on this one. I mean, look, the only thing I would add on to what video cards leaked, which is that the Golden Rabbit Edition 6750 10 gigabyte is actually a 6700 with like a 6750 TDP, which is very underwhelming. And I would be surprised if it matched a 6700 XT, even if clocked that fast. I've also heard there's a 12 gigabyte model still, though, and I don't really know what that means. Is it Navi 22 cut down or 21 cut down to a 192-bit bus, or is it just a 300 watt 6750 XT? I don't know, but what I do know is both of those things are out there. There is also a 12 gigabyte 6750 Golden Rabbit edition, at least in concept. If they launched or not, I guess I can't confirm. And I'm told the entire point of these products is to try to bring a 4060 killer to the $300 price point in China, with the 4060 supposedly selling well. And so, yeah, they'll have a 6750 Golden Rabbit edition, 10 gigabyte that uses double the energy of the 4060, but it perhaps is 20% stronger with extra RAM at the same price. That's the idea. On the subject of low-end graphics cards, we also have Navi 23 supposedly already end of life. It's not official, but it comes from one of those accounts, that has been pretty reliable in the past, I believe. And it's funny because I've seen a lot of people reporting why wouldn't they end of life Navi 23, so the 6600 or 6600 XT, 6650 XT, when the 7600 is a cheaper, better version of that, which is true. But also, guys, my understanding is they've made enough Navi 23 for 2 years or something stupid. So not only do they have enough forever, but Navi 33 is less expensive to produce and just better. So yes, no surprises there. And then this popped up last minute before we started recording, or really I think it was from a day ago or something, or the beginning of today. But Intel, there's websites reporting that Intel Arc is well and alive because someone noticed a Battle Mage die in the failure lab in Intel.
Hell yeah.
Oh, nothing says things are going well than Battle Mage, a product that was announced to come out this year. The only sighting of it has been in a failure analysis lab in Intel.
Hell yeah.
Guys, there's a lot of failed things that there's pictures of out there, like Navi, that never come out from Radeon and NVIDIA. Just because someone's analyzing why this thing sucks does not mean it's alive and well. But really good reporting, everybody. Trying to point out that Arc's doing well, even though we still don't have the A580.
Yep.
Don't even have the A580, but we're talking about Battle Mage doing well. Is there any common sense in some reporting here? All right. Let us move on then to the final reader mails, which a lot of these are about Intel stuff that we didn't really have an Intel story, but so we're just going to try to cover your thoughts in the reader mails. Florida Man writes in and says, Tom, regarding rentable units, which were leaked in a recent video or recent pieces of content for Panther Lake and later, is this Intel's big answer to their long ongoing security flaws? Every mitigation they have to implement seems to be related to hyperthreading. Or is this just mean telling server customers to turn it off? So having a completely different approach might help for a while. I think the fundamental reason, and what I've heard somewhat at Intel tell me, is they are aware their cores are too big. They're aware. And that rentable units organize cores into two core units to save die space on resources. So no, that's why they're doing it. And also they think they can get incredible single threading performance. Is the hyper-threading issue, which a lot of security flaws in Ryzen are linked to SMT as well, by the way. Is that maybe a little asterisk at the top where they're like, we wouldn't have to worry about that bullshit anymore? Yeah, maybe, but that's not why they're doing it. QH Freddy writes in yet again and says, does Intel need E-cores when they start using rentable units? Yeah.
Yes.
They're going to be far more important. And I'm going to be watching closely at Air Lake's multi-threading to see where they're going with this. Because, if they remove hyper-threading, those E-cores better get to Golden Cove status in a year or two. They want to keep up with the 24 and 32 core options AMD might have just next year. Aiden writes in and he says, hi, Tom and Dan. 2 of the last big releases from Microsoft, Forza Horizon 5 and Starfield, offered paid early access, which was cost $30 for about the first week or so that you could play it before everybody else. And you already had to get and you already had to get the game, and you already had to have Game Pass, I believe. Is this Xbox's solution to loss of revenue from day one game sales? Yes.
That's what it sounds like. Real pro consumer, Tom. Pay $30 to get it a week early.
Guys, they did it. Game Pass has made gaming cheaper. You pay Microsoft hundreds of dollars a year, and then you also still pay day one sales.
Yeah. Great.
Nobody, like not me or you, Dan, were saying this was an inevitability that they'd have to start charging more eventually to make up for their loss, their horrible, like, anti-profit margins. Certainly no one could have seen this coming. Yay, Game Pass saves gaming. Florida Man writes in, that new 32-inch 4K 240 hertz monitor looks excellent that I've seen online recently. Have we reached peak gaming monitor, at least before we reach holograms? No, I'm sure there will be better monitors every few years. In fact, I remember the 1080p stagnation, and then we went from like absolute garbage LCD to LED to IPS. And I mean, I think I own like 3 different 1080p monitors, and they felt light years better.
Yeah, there's more than just resolution and frame rate, so things will keep getting better, even if resolution doesn't improve for a while.
Indubitably. All right, Dan, that is all the stories, all of the things we had to cover for this episode, and it is in the middle of the night, and I haven't even eaten dinner yet, so I am exhausted. Is there any other things you wanted to discuss on this episode before you turn around and fall asleep on that bed?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Dan, for coming on so late. I want to thank everybody for listening. Remember, you'll get this. Some people already did. If you're hearing this in the free feeds, got this episode early and ad-free on Patreon. Just $2 a month gets you Die Shrink and the ability to ask us questions and access to the Discord. $4 a month gets you Broken Silicon early, ad-free, and free questions on loose ends and free reader mail for Broken Silicon and thanks in the credits. And there's other tiers and content higher and higher. I said it recently, it's not even a cup of coffee, Dan. It's a can of tuna a month to support us. And we can't do this without our patrons. There's some episodes where we have less ads than others, and there's some pieces of content every now and then without an ad, and I don't sweat it because I know that I don't have to find some crazy deal with Noctua to make ends meet. The people there are funding us and putting bread on the table anyway. So again, thank you to everybody for supporting us. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and subscribe to Broken Silicon, a podcast app of choice. Not Stitcher, apparently, because I guess that service is now dead. So all Apple Podcasts, apparently, and Spotify. And no, I have nothing else to say. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody, and have a good rest of your week.
Goodbye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugada as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the about/support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels:
Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, E. Jids, Daniel D., Aaron Close, Jen Ratto, Daniel Hyde, Brian Riggleman, Sam Miller, MJV1, Deke, GZ Ziggy, Asenius Chalmers, Jem Ferreira, Andrew S., Falcom Malev, General Drips, Jensen Wang, Nathan Mose, Eric Jackson, Sark Castro, Evan Dingle, Greg Wanchuk, Chris Rich, Nicholas Buckner, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Jesse Jeskowie, X3D SB08, Hal Booma, Blake, Hard4Room.com, Franco Frederick, Shredbird, Dr. Foreman, Jake223, Jake Martin, Slicky, Ricky Tan, Christopher A. Butler, Stefan Hart, Meat and Pork, Stu, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Nanian, Sammy Malas, Deepest Learners, Mad, Zoot Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Greg, Patrick Gross, Stefans, Jordan Simkovic, Amiable Chief, Win Wang, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Julian Leak, I Should, Mark Raidmaker, The Boss Haas, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Cameron, Wesley Shager, Henry Zhang, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Roger Davies, Cameron, Hexapuma, Chrysantine, Meyertech, Rance, Reginald Ari, T. Cottom, Jackson Miller, Gregory Sacker, Neithra Zink, The Eternal Dreamers, JSMMH, Game and Since Reagan, Jeff Sedler, AWS Danny, Loophole 35, Winstar, James I. Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Postmedia, Dave Schultz, Mac Taffy, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Britt Jones, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bussell, I7, 11700K, Joe Foot, Hardland, Slushboss, C2, Jensen, Angima, Joseph Kelly, Samuel Park, Keith Moore, Himsa Gunk, Tails 2299, Brian Wright, John Sisyphos, Earth Taurus, The Forbidden Juice, Fenty CC, Kiko Sato, Toka, RB Racer, Me, Vale Vega, AC, Colin Tadards, Lord Starstream, Michael Cozy, Dr. J. Mads, Alex Vega, Free D, John Swin, Ronan BC, Terminal Junkie, Brian Wright, Jed Baldwin, Joe LaMartina, Kikum, Albert Gunn, Solarized 80, Christopher Ricks, Jamie Whitworth, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.